2024 GOP presidential candidate Nikki Haley participated in her first solo CNN town hall last night, where she addressed Iowa voters on her controversial Civil War comments. Let's watch.
You were asked to explain the cause of the Civil War. You obviously did not mention slavery. And afterwards, you came up, you said that was a mistake. In fact, you said it should have been the first thing that you said. So you did come out and say that. Chris Christie, though, came out and said that you gave that answer not because you're, in his words, dumb or racist, but because you're, quote, unwilling to offend anyone by telling the truth. What do you say to that?
No one's ever said that I am unwilling to offend. I offend plenty of people because I call people out when they do something wrong. What I will tell you is Chris Christie is from New Jersey. I should have said slavery right off the bat. But if you grow up in South Carolina, literally in second and third grade, you learn about slavery. You grow up and you have, I had black friends growing up. It is a very talked about thing. We have a big history in South Carolina when it comes to, slavery, when it comes to all the things that happened with the Civil War, all of that. I was thinking past slavery.
Haley was also pressed on accusations that she mocked and belittled the people of Iowa with a recent quip.
So, Ambassador, I want to ask you about something you said at a town hall in New Hampshire. You talk about the importance of New Hampshire and Iowa. We're here in Iowa. But you said about the primary process that while Iowa goes first, New Hampshire, quote, corrects it.
Oh, my gosh.
Ron DeSantis said that was incredibly disrespectful to Iowans.
Of course he did.
And, of course, we are here in Iowa. I'm just looking around at people's faces. Okay, so is there anything else you'd like to say?
Look, we have done 150-plus town halls. You got to have some fun, too.
Haley also took some jabs at her former boss, accusing him of being too soft with dictators. Watch.
The second thing is you look at how he deals with dictators. I think it's completely wrong. He praised China's President Xi a dozen times after China gave us COVID. You don't do that. He congratulated them on the 70th anniversary of the Communist Party. We don't do that. When Israel fell to her knees, you're going to go pick a fight with Israel's prime minister because of some issue, personal issue you had with him before, and you're going to praise Hezbollah? It's just not what we need to do. We need to do this without emotion. We need to do this with a sane sense of how we're going to take America forward.
All in all, Haley is trailing just 4 points behind primary leader, former President Donald Trump in New Hampshire, according to a new poll released just today. Further down south, things are a little less rosy for Haley, as she's trailing Trump by 29 points in her home state, South Carolina. And as for Haley's number one nemesis, Vivek Ramaswamy, well, he posted this video to X yesterday telling his voters that a vote for Haley is a vote for the PATRIOT Act.
As bad as Joe Biden's censorship has been of the tech industrial complex and using tech companies to do through the back door what government couldn't through the front door. I mean, Jack Smith's subpoena, for God's sake, calls for anybody who's liked or retweeted a Trump post to be included in their subpoena of Trump's 2020, whatever allegations they're making against him. Nikki Haley makes them pale in comparison. I mean, this is somebody who wants every government-issued ID to be tied to a social media profile as a mandate for people being able to use the internet. And so if you're Larry Fink or Reid Hoffman or whoever, this is a far better puppet than anybody the modern Democratic establishment is actually able to put up, while giving yourself the air cover to accomplish exactly your objectives.
So, Jessica, let's dive in by talking about Haley's response to her bungled answer on the cause of the Civil War. It seems like even at this point, she doesn't really have a good explanation for what exactly happened there.
Yeah, I've lived in the North. I grew up in the North, just 45 minutes outside of New York City in Connecticut. In Stamford. I also moved to North Carolina during the COVID pandemic. I lived in the North and in the South. So the way people talk about slavery is different. The way people learn about slavery and the Civil War is different. But there's a way to tackle this without falling into this very common trap of saying, it wasn't really about slavery. It was about economics, which is something a lot of people do to appease voters in the South who are sometimes taught this in public school and some who genuinely believe this. And I put it this way, the North benefited economically from slavery as well. They definitely try and paint the narrative of the Civil War like we were the good guys and the South were the bad guys and they wanted to do slavery so bad we had to fight a war to get them to stop. No, the biggest slave auctions were in the North. They were getting raw crops from the South very cheaply because they were not paying for the labor to produce it. They were benefiting from slavery tremendously. Think about how we handle drug offenses in the United States. If someone is selling drugs to someone else, the person that gets a more intense sentence is the person who's selling the drugs. So the North was just as guilty of slavery, if not more guilty of reaping the benefits of slavery and participating and perpetuating it. That doesn't mean the Civil War wasn't fought over slavery. You can say both sides were equally guilty and bad without saying that the Civil War was not fought over slavery. Of course, the North was fighting for slavery to end. You can recognize that they were fighting for it to end in the same way you can say that there are cops who sell drugs to someone else and then arrest them for doing drugs. Fine. But is slavery bad? Yes. Like, there's nuance in this, but I think Nikki Haley just like really strays away from nuance even in that response. It felt very measured and calculated and not honest. And I think it's easier to have nuance when you're just being honest. Amber, what did you make of all of it?
I think you're right that she really avoids nuance at all costs. It was like that moment on the debate stage where Vivek Ramaswamy was sort of pushing back at the idea that Republicans should just send unlimited dollars to Ukraine and Israel and in regards to other world conflicts. And her response was basically, there's a good guy and a bad guy, and our leader has to know who the good guys and the bad guys are. And it's just a very naive way, I guess, to look at the world and a very naive way to approach foreign policy, which is actually precisely the problem I had with her attacking Donald Trump for his praise of Xi Jinping, because it removes all context from the situation. It's exactly like why we criticized Joe Biden when he called Xi a dictator to his face in that APEC summit in San Francisco. Because when you're trying to conduct diplomacy, it's usually not the best idea to insult someone to their face. And there's a time and a place for perhaps praising someone you might consider a foe or an enemy if you're trying to extract something out of them, or if you're trying to perhaps tamp down tensions a bit. And that was precisely what Trump did throughout his presidency. Was a lot of people complained about his rhetoric on the foreign stage, but it turned out he kept us out of a lot of wars that have now been started or intensified under the Biden administration. And she has previously done the same exact thing with Xi Jinping, by the way. She has praised China. She was actually the top-ranked governor for bringing Chinese associated businesses to her state. That's according to research from the Rhodium Group. And her explanation for her praise of China when she was at the UN was, well, I was at the UN then, so that's different. But that's exactly what she's criticizing Trump for. Trump was president then. So what is really the difference between their two policies? I think she really does struggle with having an honesty problem.
Yeah, to say, well, what I was saying was different when I was working in the UN tells us everything we need to know about Nikki Haley. Her story and opinion changes based on what position she's in or what position she's running for. And to say that China is an enemy and to say black and white, whoever's a good guy should be on our side and our leaders should know who they are. Whoever's a bad guy we should be fighting against. That's just like not how the world works. Again, it's about nuance. But that's been a trend in U.S. foreign policy making for a century, to just say there's good guys out there and there's bad guys out there, and we're going to tell you who they are, instead of just being very honest and saying, you know what, we actually go out and fight for U.S. economic interests abroad. That's what this China problem is about. They're worried that China's economy is growing and that it's outpacing the United States growth and production. And I've driven through South Carolina, where I live in Charlotte is, 20 minutes from South Carolina. You go into a gas station and you see these hats that are, USA, Patriot, and they all say made in China. Nikki Haley is not someone who's tough on China when it comes to economics, and the United States would be ignorant, anyone in the administration, to think that we can defeat China's growth through framing them as an enemy and justifying some kind of proxy war in the South China Sea, in Taiwan, elsewhere. Maybe it's time we learn how to cooperate with the people we share the planet with and recognize they have a role in the global economy as well. There's a way to mitigate international threats if they present themselves. Someone is not an enemy just because they have a bigger economy than the United States and can potentially outtrade us. That doesn't make someone an enemy. And so I think Nikki Haley, if she gets the nomination, it would be very dangerous if she won, because it seems like more of the same, neoconservative policies.
Oh, yeah, she'll start a war with Iran, apparently, according to some of the things that she said on the campaign trail, the very disturbing stuff. We'll be back with more Rising after this.